What if I told you some of the greatest minds in history? Albert Einstein, Steve Jobs, Leonardo da Vinci, all struggled in school. They were told they aren't smart enough and that they would need to change to succeed. Could you imagine if they had listened? The world would be a different place. I was told the same thing they were. I was told that I'm dyslexic, and because of that, I can't read or write as well as my peers. So to do well in school, I would need these crutches that they called accommodations. So throughout elementary school, all my teachers told me about my accommodations, disability 504. But to me, all these words meant were, I was disabled. I was less than, and worst of all, that I just didn't fit. But throughout all this, there was one voice calling out to me, telling me that I wasn't actually disabled or less than, but that I just had different strengths. That voice was my dad. Even when I told myself I couldn't succeed, he had a vision for me even I couldn't see. He had this idea that my dyslexia wasn't actually my biggest disability, but it was my biggest strength. So he pushed me and he urged me to try new things, hoping that something might play to my strengths rather than my weaknesses. And then we struck gold. I found the thing I was great at. I was given the opportunity to give a short talk at my local mosque. So I took it. I researched, I practiced, and I prepared. And that night, standing on that stage, as I shared my thoughts and I saw the audience connect with my words, I felt like I had finally found that strength. It was the first time I wasn't being judged by how quickly I could read or write. I was being valued for my ideas and my creativity. I didn't have those crutches that we call accommodations. It was all me. And I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. But it made me question, how? How come I was doing better without the accommodations and the extra help? Well, you see, dyslexic brains are just wired differently. Research by the National Library of Medicine shows that dyslexic individuals actually have an increased and above average activation of the right hemisphere of the brain, which is responsible for creativity, imagination, and abstract thinking. So it was my dyslexia that had wired and structured my brain to have the creative ability to be able to engage a crowd. It was then I realized I wasn't less than or broken, but that I just had different strengths, and I needed to find the environment that played to those strengths. So as I grew older and I started to look into what career path I could follow, I had kept that in mind. And I started to look into all the different options the school had presented me. But none of them felt like they fit me. So I said, screw it. I'm not going to conform to some pre-made path. I'm going to make my own. I want to be an entrepreneur. So I started to look into all the different business options that were around me. And I ended up starting a social media management agency that is still flourishing today and utilized my creativity and my strengths. I once again found something that let me thrive the same way I did on stage. But I was still struggling in school. I was still getting bad grades. And I know on paper, I was considered dumb. Well, it turns out that the very traits that made traditional schooling hard and difficult for dyslexic individuals like the heavy reliance on reading and memorizing, the rigid structure, and the one-size-fits-all learning style, are the exact opposite of what's required to build a business. Dyslexic thinkers excel in innovation and problem solving. Research by the National Library of Medicine shows that dyslexic individuals adapt quickly to challenges, embrace trial and error, all skills that are essential for entrepreneurship. But most people don't see that side of dyslexia. When asked about dyslexia in a survey, 80% of people link dyslexia with a below average intelligence, ignoring the neurodiversity of their peers. Neurodiversity is the idea that we all have different strengths, and that we all have different brain structures and functions, and with that, different strengths and weaknesses. But people have chose to take one brain structure and call it the norm, and every deviation from that norm is considered a mental disability. Once again, capping the potential and ignoring the strengths of that brain structure. In my case, it was my dyslexia that had wired my brain to have my strengths in entrepreneurship and public speaking, and my weaknesses in school. But there are still millions of kids across the world who haven't found their strengths. Because all that shows up on a report card are our weaknesses. Our intelligence isn't being measured by our creativity and our strengths. It's being measured by how quickly we can find what X equals or how well we can write an essay. And because of this, millions of people across the world will continue to struggle on a path that isn't designed for them and their strengths. But the truth is the greatest minds, the visionaries, the problem solvers, the inventors, aren't the ones who simply fit in. They're the ones who failed in the traditional path and went out and made one that fits them and their strengths. And when they did, they were revolutionary. You don't have to fit and follow the path that society has made for you. You can make your own. And when you do, you'll find that the very thing you thought was once holding you back will be the key to your success. Thank you very much.